Coronado died, I have to do something dramatic. Dictatorship mode at one time. I'm going to fight this all along. Jail time and every other thing you might imagine. And I've been very fortunate to still be alive.
Welcome to our first special here at Palace Conversations. Meet your host Amos Hornstein from PalaceLife.com, your international immigration partner. Today, speaking with Roberto Eisenmann II, the legendary Panamanian entrepreneur and journalist, founder of La Prensa Newspaper and developer of the beach town Coronado in Panama. Also in the conversation, his son, Roberto Eisenmann III, founder of Terra Viva, a sustainable living concept in Coronado. Let's hear their story with some exceptional details and insights.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to be in Coronado. Mr. Eisenmann, your grandfather already purchased the land here, and you built many years of your life, built up this place, and then even your son continued doing this, and you convinced him to join the efforts. Can I ask you this? How did you convince Roberto to buy miniature donkeys?
I did everything in my power to convince him not to. That shows how much he follows my advice.
They're there waiting for you.
Yes,
but after all, it came to a great result still, right?
Yeah, he normally does things against my better judgment, and he does well at it.
Fantastic.
Which doesn't say too much for my opinion.
But can I ask you, you know your father who had this vision. Many people back at the time, I heard, thought it was a crazy idea to create Coronado. It's this super new concept. Panama was still a very young country. What was this vision about, which your father had about Coronado?
Well, my grandfather purchased the land his name was Gustav Eisenmann. They came from Alsace, Lorraine. And his partner was a Spanish fellow called Carlos Eleta. And they bought this property because somebody told them that on the bay here was going to be the free zone of Panama. So they bought the property around just on a speculative basis. The free zone of Panama is in Colón. So it didn't work out for them. So the land was here, and my father came back from the United States from school, came out here, fell in love with the place, and tried to convince his father to develop it. And he said, no, we bought that speculatively. We failed. We're not going to do anything with it. And he then suggested, I'll form a group of friends and buy it from you. He said, fine. So he formed a small group of friends. One of those friends has just gotten back from California and had stayed at a hotel Coronado that is still active in California. And he says, what about the name Coronado? And everybody liked it. You know, it can be pronounced well in English and Spanish. It's short. So they baptized the new project Coronado. And they bought it from the old guys, and he developed a first small development of about 60 lots. He put them up for sale. They all sold, but only he and his sister built. So the project died down because there was no more building. A little further on, he went into a second development, and there he invented a clause in the contract, this forced building. If you bought a lot, you had to build within a year. If it was beachfront, if it was 1 step back, 2 years, 3 steps back, 3 years, and so forth. And that was the trigger that started everybody building and created the initiation of the community. And from then on, it started to be very successful. When my father was 58, very young age, he was a very healthy man, very athletic. he had a heart problem. In those days, there was nothing like stents or, all of the modern day medical solutions to heart problems. So he got very sick. They had no chance for him. The doctors had nothing for him. And he finally, after 6 months of suffering, died. But before he died, he called me to his bedside. And he said, please, I want you to promise me something. I said, whatever you want, Dad. He says, I want you to follow my dream in Coronado. And I said, count on that. And he said, I haven't finished yet. I want you to follow my dream in Coronado no matter what it costs.
Oh.
And I said, count on it. And he passed away. I had just bought my own business in the retail area, so I was in debt up to here. I was working 18-hour days, and I said, what do I do now to follow his dream? So I created a very professional, small team and started selling lots as he had done. But I had a very good friend who was Panama's main builder. And his name is Gilberto Guardia. He ended up being the first Panamanian director of the Panama Canal. And I went to him and I said, everybody said Bob Eisenmann died, Coronado died. I have to do something dramatic to break out of this negative feeling. And he says, well, what do you have in mind? I said, I have in mind building a building on the beach. That's unheard of in Panama. I said, that's exactly what I need, something unheard of, something that will break us out of the routine. And condominiums had just surfaced. Mm-hmm. And so he and I got an airplane. We went to Spain, where they were developing a lot of condominiums. We went down the coast of Spain, picked up everything we could find. Then we went to Florida. They had started condominium building, so we picked up everything there. And we had enough information to do it right. And we developed a plan and started a pre-sale. And to everybody's surprise, it was extremely successful immediately. So that brought Coronado, put Coronado back on the map, because that was something unheard of. These tall buildings, beachfront in the interior, which is what we call anything over the bridge. Mm-hmm. From the city. And the rest is history. Coronado has been very successful. It is a family pride kind of situation, more than an economic business. We're more preoccupied with doing things right and doing it right for everybody than how much profit we make or we don't make. Obviously, in every company, profit is a necessity, because if not, you don't stay alive. But profit is not our main objective. It's been a family pride thing. And now it's in the 4th generation, if you start with the old man.
Yes. And it is also your home most of the time here.
Yeah.
So how does that change your approach of crafting this place? You're crafting your home.
Well, I now know everything that is needed to live here. We have it all. And life in Coronado is perfectly comfortable. There's nothing that you would need to go to the city for. Everything is here. We have a very large commercial area. We have 7 banks. We've got all sorts of needs for permanent living. And we expect that as time goes on, more and more people will be living out here and enjoying, obviously, a much better quality of life than you do in the city.
And the amenities, like especially golf, is a big part of that too. Early on, you built this huge golf course here, designed by Tom and George Fazio,
Right.
and that was, if I remember it correctly, in 1974. Today, I read 46 of the 200 best American golf courses are designed by this designer. But how did you get this designer in 1974? Panama was not on the map. I mean,
That's right. That's
Yes.
right. And I had never seen a golf course in my life. I'd never played golf.
no way.
To play golf reasonably well, you have to dedicate time to it. I never had time. I was always 18-hour days, so I never had time to learn golf. I asked my friends that do play golf, what are the 5 best golf designers in the world? And they gave me a list. 4 of them were very well-known names of very prestigious golfers that have won a lot of prizes. And there was George and Tom Fazio that I've never heard before. So I said, who's George and Tom Fazio? And they said, well, he was famous a generation before, but he dedicated himself to design golf courses, and he has a particular system. He only takes 3 to 5 jobs a year, because the other guys that have a lot more prestige today, they sign off on the plans, but they really are just prestiging the plan with their name.
I see.
George and Tom Fazio actually build their courses. They don't sign off. So I said, that's the man I need, because I know nothing about golf. So I need somebody hands-on. Where is he? In Palm Beach. So I got on an airplane, went to Palm Beach, knocked on his door, and I said, my name is Roberto Eisenmann. I'm from Panama, and I'm here because I need for you to design our golf course. And he said, Panama? No. Why? He says, I like to sleep in my own bed.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. So I don't like to travel and stay overseas. And I pestered him. And finally, after 4 or 5 days, he says, you're still here. I said, yes. And he says, you really want me to design your golf course? I said, yes. And he says, okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. Open a bank account in the United States, here in Palm Beach, Florida. Deposit $1 million, and that bank account has one signature, mine.
Okay.
And leave me the hell alone, and in 1.5 years, I'll have your golf course playable. So I called my partner in Panama, and I said, oh, this is the way this guy, I said, he could take the next airplane to Brazil with our $1 million, and we wouldn't know better. And he says to me, do we really have an option? I said, no, we really don't have it. He says, well, let's go to the banks and borrow the money and open his account, and let's get going. And that's what we did. And 1.5 years on the dot, he had the golf course playable. And it's a wonderful golf course because it's challenging for a pro, yet it's playable for a rookie or a hacker, as the golfers say.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a fantastic ride.
So today you play golf on the course?
I play at golf. I really never played.
And did Tom and George, did they come here as well?
You know who inaugurated our golf course? George DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio.
Mm-hmm.
Remember Joe DiMaggio? You're not going to remember.
No.
He was a great baseball player who had retired and was a golfer at that time. And somebody here in Panama knew him, so he asked them to come and throw. So there was 2 first balls. One was Joe DiMaggio, and the other one was Ricardo Arias, who was an ex-president of Panama and an avid golfer. And from then on, we've done a lot of work on the golf course. Golf courses are very complicated to keep in shape, and that's our jewel. So we take good care of it.
Yeah, working for so many years on this project, and you mentioned at the same time you had several other businesses as well. I can imagine there must be every day hundreds of problems and challenges coming towards you for many, many years.
Opportunities.
Opportunities, yeah. How did you handle with the pressure during that time, and how did you keep up the drive and motivation to keep
You
following
know, the
through
guy
with
at the
that?
circus that has the plates in the air, he has 5 or 6 plates in the air. He can't let them drop. Have you seen that? Obviously, that has been my life. Very, very many plates in the air. I don't know. I'm actually an entrepreneur. I like to start things that I feel this country needs that are not yet developed here. So I'm always inventing something. I am very conscious of the needs of my country. I have a country attitude instead of a small community attitude. And so when we went into dictatorship mode at one time, I got very disturbed. I said, I'll never live under dictatorship, so I'm going to fight this all along. And what we needed was a free press. I had never been in the insides of a newspaper before, but I sat down and I started calling on the best people in the world on the newspaper business, and I put together a newspaper that has 1,000 small shareholders. Nobody has more than $5,000 in shares. So I guaranteed it was an independent, truly independent newspaper with no one owner, but with 1,000 small owners, including all the employees. And that newspaper in 6 months was the newspaper of record, obviously with a little help from the dictatorship, attacks, closures, jail time, and every other thing you might imagine. And things like that I developed the Liberty Association, that is the representative from Transparency International to fight corruption, not only in government but in the private sector, because it takes two to tango. It's never one-sided, and things like that. So I've kept very busy, and I've been very fortunate to still be alive because my father died at 58 and I am now 86, and I'm still plugging along.
Yes, and the fascinating thing is that Coronado at the same time was continuing to grow.
That's right.
And it is still, when you look into the newspapers or into the media, it's named as one of the #1 Pacific cities here in Panama. How did you manage to pass on that vision which your father gave to you up to your sons?
We didn't have to make any real effort because, when I was a kid, my father brought me to Coronado every weekend. When he was a kid, he came to Coronado with his grandfather first.
Yes.
Almost
When
every
I was
weekend.
2 years old, he would bring me here every weekend.
Yeah.
So
As kids, Coronado was part of their life. So it really was, we didn't have to make any effort for the kids to be involved.
there is an interesting challenge into this game, because when my dad becomes actually one of the biggest public foes of the dictatorship, what happened is that the dictatorship started doing anything possible to adverse the businesses. So, for example, the streets of Coronado were never passed on to the government, so the government take care of them just out of spite because of that relationship. So, talk about challenges. It's been an uphill battle, all along. On top of the fact that we don't give bribes or anything like that. So every time we have a permission, governmental permission or something, you have to know that it took us, 5 times more than the other business people. But we're still at it,
And it can be done. The proof is that it can be done.
So I imagine you had many family moments here in Coronado. What are the moments where your family is meeting in Coronado? What are your best memories of this place?
My best memories always go back to my father. I had a relationship with my father that was extraordinary. He was my closest friend. He was my partner. He was my confessor. He was everything for me. It was one of those relationships that are unbeatable. And I remembered sitting on the beach with him when I was a kid, and he would give me his vision. I see a building here, I see a golf course there, and as a kid, at that time, he would come in here and go out here, but somehow I retained it. Later in life, when I had to come together, put it together, I had somebody develop a master plan for me. But they didn't have to invent anything. I said, I need a golf course here. I need a building here. Everything you see in Coronado, he envisioned. I remember when we inaugurated the hotel, we had the President of the Republic of those days, cortar la cinta, the ribbon. And I had my mother standing next to me. And I bent over to her and whispered, do you think we can stop trying now? And she said, you guys have done much more than he ever imagined this place would be. I said, no, I don't think that's the case, but I felt a certain relief that we had done the basics of everything he envisioned. And that got through.
She actually lived to 103.
Yeah.
So she was able to,
She came to me I went to see her one day because she lived with my sister. And she says, I have a big problem. I said, what's your problem? She says, I'm 103. I have to die. This is, this can't go on. I said, well, what's the problem? She says, the problem is nothing hurts. How do you die if nothing hurts? I realized there was a big problem. 3 or 4 months later, she suddenly started going downhill. And then in a question of 2 weeks, she died peacefully. But I can always remember that moment because I said, if nothing hurts and you have to die, how do you get to do that? No? So.
And she lived all her life also here in Panama, in Coronado?
Well, she lived.
No,
She was born in Trinidad, of American parents. So she actually was a North American who had never lived one day of her life in the United States. And she moved to Panama when she was a teenager because her father was a professional horse trainer, racehorses. Mm-hmm. And one of the big racehorse owners of Panama imported him to train his horses. So they were a very modest family, a very modest name, Irish blood. And she lived all her life in Panama, never learned how to speak good Spanish, like every good American, huh? But it was so funny the way she made the effort. She was a great lady, and actually my father, she was quiet. She was not a bubbly person, But my father came home from work every day, and he'd lie on her lap, and they'd both have a martini, and he would relate to her the details of everything he had done in the day. And she would sit there, and suddenly she would say, I don't like that guy. He mentioned somebody. I met with so-and-so. She would say, I don't like that guy. And that was the end of that guy. And my father listened to her.
The family history is so interconnected with Coronado and Julia Eisenmann's.
Yeah.
You said you fulfilled, your mother said you fulfilled most of the dreams of your father. You said probably you have fulfilled even more.
Yeah.
What is next? What comes in the future for Coronado?
Well, we are, to this point, I would say, 95% sold out as far as the land that we were developing for individual homes and so forth. Now, there's a lot of services that people require that are still not available at the level we would like. And of course, we have 4,000 homeowners?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people that need a lot of service. And besides that, there's a resale business. Because people come and go from, if people die, the kids come, take over the land when they need to sell it. They need sales service. So it's a big community to service now, and we feel obligated to do the best we can to fill that need. That would now be him and his children.
Yes.
Because
I think it's interesting that now, with all this mining dilemma, came forward. The idea of the protecting the environment and so on and so forth. Thank God it's in vogue, so to speak. And then Terra Viva, which is I've dreamed of just 3 years ago in the midst of COVID, becomes rather aligned with the thinking of many, many Panamanians, how much youngsters are here in Panama, maybe 25% of the whole population, which has been the movement in these past few weeks.
Well, it's almost 50% of our voters.
Yeah, so I believe humbly that what we're doing is creating another type of life environment, much more natural, European-sized homes, but then the environment is just taken to another level. And I think humbly that it will trickle down and make other people in the Coronado organization follow suit and improve their own communities and plant more trees and be a lot more environment driven, so to speak.
And this is Roberto following his dream, which is incredible because this project, Terra Viva, is his dream. And he has developed it really on his own. And we're very proud of what he's achieved because it's completely different from the rest of the place and very complementary. And I think it's going to be incredibly successful.
And I have to say there's a lot of our family values and our essence is here also. We have, I like to put into the table my great uncle, your uncle, Eugene Eisenmann. He's a doctor, and he happened to be Panamanian, but he lived in New York, graduated, doctorate in Harvard Law School, put up his business outfit in New York, was very successful, and then he gets a stroke. And the doctor told him at that point, you better get yourself a hobby or something because you're going to croak out of pressure. So he was a bird watcher. And So he wasn't married, didn't have any kids. So basically, he delved into the New York Museum of Natural History and spent the 40 years of the rest of his life identifying neotropical birds in all the American territory. America is South, Central, and North America. So, he transcended, actually. If you go to Barro Colorado today, or you see the Birds of Panama book, he's really veneered, if you will, for that. And somehow, they say that that fruit trees are the restaurant for birds. So I started thinking of all these fruit trees, and we planted actually a botanical garden, of all the fruit trees in Panama, at least. There's 58 species of them planted. And so I'm going to name that Central Park after him. And I think he would be very content, very happy to be able to see students and scientists and people go to Terra Viva and see all sorts of birds. Not too long ago, I posted something in Instagram of this bird that came on knocking on the model home, and it was a very beautiful bird. And someone made a comment in the post that this is incredible. I mean, we science and bird watchers spend weeks on end in the forest trying to look for this bird, and there you have him. So what's going to happen is that a very large variety of birds will come in and back and forth there. So it's been a beautiful journey, really, altogether. And so I'm very happy to be able to make yet another link into this chain of things that we have here. So I think there's still a lot to do in Coronado, to actually sort of raise the bar in services, in ambience, and environment, and all together. So
besides, we have quite a large expat community here. I hate the word, but everybody, it's universal now. Here you are from Germany. I mean, there's obviously a lot of people from Canada, a lot of people from the United States, but also other European countries. And one of the things that attracts them, besides everything we've talked about, is that there is an expat community in Coronado. So they feel they can relate to other residents very easily. Although Panama is an easy country to relate to for anybody that comes from an area where English is spoken, even if it's not in the first language. Because most Panamanians speak it in English. Not very good, but, they get along. And our way of doing business is more American, the American way.
And actually, I think that I agree with you. The expat concept is altogether, doesn't make any sense, because Panama is a melting pot. Panama was created thanks to people from abroad that came in looking for, at that time, gold. Hate to say it, but building the canal and making fortune, etc. So you have all kinds of international associations here, communities here in Panama. I don't know how big the German community is, but for a start, I mean, I know 3 gentlemen, etc. that are making waves here, and
we really should be able to speak to them in German.
Yes, I know, and our last name is Eisenmann.
Shame on us.
But
but Coronado is really known that a lot of internationals come here for living. And was that intended originally, or how did that happen?
It just happened. It just happened. We didn't make any special efforts in that. We were too busy getting the locals involved. But it happened, and we're very happy it did, because
there's something that you haven't said And this came from my grandfather days, that he basically had this concept that every decent person and family should have a place, to be able to rest, and Coronado came to be that place. So, then my dad and us, we always had this idea of promoting the land that we would develop with financing that was really financially stupid, 30 years, 3% interest, etc. But the idea was not the economical profit, but to make it easy for people to actually be able to purchase a piece of land and make their home. And thus, what happened is that we ended up having people with very humble homes, $25,000 hot, etc., and some people having homes that are millions of dollars, so that there is a melting pot here in and of itself, socially. You don't have a place here in Coronado only for, the well-to-do rich people or something like that. So that has carried on, and you walk in Coronado, and it's a whole big community where people can really, put Bermudas and a T-shirt and go into their friends' homes without any previous announcement, and they're welcome. Other communities are not like that. They're very much city-like. So if you don't get invited to,
Or walled off.
yes, and so that's pretty much an important trait, if you will, of Coronado. And there we go in Terra Viva, where we prohibited in the bylaws to have walls and fences, etc. And we want to make a community organically made, so that people have neighbors as friends, and people alike. So we're looking for that. We're looking for decent eggs, people with good values and principles, and that are in love with nature and flora and fauna, and that's what we're looking for.
This is really special. Everyone is welcome here, and you can really feel it. International people, but also people from Panama, of course. As a last question, it's so special to talk to both of you, because both of you have known this place all your life, and there are lots of people from Canada, USA, or Germany who might consider living here, but who might have never been in Panama before. And they are thinking, is this a place where they can be happy, where they can live? What would you recommend them, and who do you think would be happiest living here?
I'm going to tell you a couple of things. I can guarantee you, as a Panamanian, that you'll find two things. You'll find people to be kind in Panama. We're all very kind people, all together, and you won't find perfection here. So there are plenty of opportunities to make this a better place, and you will not be killed in the streets, like it's happening, unfortunately, in the U.S. So this is pretty much a safe haven all around. So, we're waiting for you,
That sounded like a commercial spot.
But it's not. It's really how we feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we Panama is a very distinct, doesn't fit into any box, because geographically we are Central America. Historically we are South America. And culturally we are Caribbean. So there's no way to box us in. And, South American, we have a lot of history. Central America is a newer part of the New World. And culturally, we're happy people. You hear a drum and you start dancing. And it can be any drum. It's part of our, Caribbean culture and our black culture and our Indian culture. And they're all intermixed here, so it's a happy place in general. And
No earthquakes. We
No
have no
earthquakes.
tsunamis, no
I
hurricanes.
talked to the guy upstairs, and we
none of that.
guaranteed no earthquakes. Which is why the canal is built in Panama, because there's no earthquake. But the way to find out is to get on an airplane and come here, because there's flights from all over the world, and a lot of direct flights from Europe and from the United States and from South America. So there's a hub in Panama. It's easy to get here. And spend a week. Spend a week here and try it out. I'm sure that most people are happy when they do that.
Well, that happened with me. And thank you so much, both of you, for your time. It's really special, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this time.
Thank you.